Breaking news, Sony officially announces the A1 Mark II and gives us a launch date, but they also kill a really important photography line. We'll review the financial reports for all the major camera companies, and I'll tell you what I think their next step should be to make a little bit more money. And Apple directly attacks Adobe's Lightroom and Photoshop in a huge move. I'll tell you all about it, but first I want to thank our sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is where you start when you need any presence on the web. Go to squarespace.com/Tony. Set up a website for your portfolio, your video reel, your personal project, your business, whatever it is. Squarespace makes it easy to set up. They make it beautiful. You can get your own custom domain. It's so much better than simple social media, where some billionaire controls the algorithm and happily sends people viewing your page to some competitor's page. That's why I use squarespace.com/Tony. Try it out completely free. And when you love it, the coupon code Tony will get you 10% off. Thanks for sponsoring us, Squarespace. Our top story, Sony officially announces the coming A1 Mark II. Now the A1 is their flagship camera. It has been our choice for wildlife and portraits. It has 50 megapixels, 30 frames per second, a sync speed of 1/400th of a second. But it's in some ways looking a little behind cameras like the Nikon Z9 and the Canon R5 Mark II. It's time for Sony to make an announcement. Well, and that time is November 19th at 9 a.m. Eastern. But that's all we officially know about it for now. So be sure to check out the upcoming launch. At the same time, some bad news for Sony users. Sony is dropping the Airpeak drone. Now, the Airpeak drone was announced 4 years ago. It's a professional level drone that integrates tightly with the Sony cameras, allowing you to use their professional cameras to get 60 megapixel still images or very high quality video out of something like an FX3. They just have decided to give up on that. I guess they decided they can't compete with the likes of DJI, but that's too bad because we really need a competitor to DJI. DJI has basically a monopoly on the drone market, and that's not good for the consumer. But it's especially bad for those of us in the United States where upcoming legislation threatens to prevent us from buying future DJI drones. And while I didn't take that legislation seriously before, President-elect Trump has always fought hard against China, and the Republicans now mostly control the Senate and the House. And thus I think there's a pretty good chance that there could be future laws that might block DJI drones. But regardless of whether that's true, we needed some competition. Regardless of whether that's true, I wanted to be able to put my A7R4 out there and get beautiful 60 megapixel landscape shots instead of the kind of crappy images that I now get out of my DJI drones. I still use my DJI drones for landscapes all the time. I've even sold huge prints with them, but they would have looked so much better if I could have used a real Sony camera. Now, I did have the opportunity to fly the S1 drone, and I never reviewed it because I never thought it was ready. Even after a couple of years of development, I didn't think it was ready. The battery life wasn't there. It was outrageously expensive. Once you outfitted it with a camera and lens, you were looking at pretty close to $15,000, $20,000 up in the air. And I've crashed more than a few drones. So I decided I just wasn't comfortable with it until they got that price point down. But now that's never going to be happening. So I'm kind of heartbroken. Let's talk about the recent financial reports. Now, as public companies, all the camera companies need to announce their financial position every 3 months, every quarter. And overall, things are going okay. The camera industry has plateaued. It dropped heavily, and now it's sort of resting at the bottom. Canon's finances were up a little bit. Ricoh, which is Pentax, actually up a little bit. They developed a new film camera, which caught some people's eyes. And Fuji's up. Their digital camera sales are doing okay, but most of that is due to the popularity of the Instax instant cameras. Nikon and Sony are mostly flat. I think the biggest news here is that Sony said this: the imaging business was essentially flat year on year. As a result, we have incorporated into our forecast a proactive change to a more cautious production and inventory plan in preparation for the year-end selling season. And that just means they're going to cut back on production a little bit. They don't think sales are going to grow the way they hoped. Looking at their finances, I can't help but think that all of these companies have lots of room to grow. Let's talk about how to grow at the low end, like the entry level, and at the high end separately. At the low end, at the entry level, I think all the camera manufacturers need to concentrate on making these cameras sexy. cute and cheap, particularly full frame cameras. Like, I love the Canon R8. It's a full frame camera, very capable. You could pick it up for like $1,100. But if you look at Sony, they don't have any capable competitor at that price point. Nikon does have a competitor at that price point, but it's not nearly as capable. We found the tech in the Z5 to be bad enough that it was frustrating for beginners to use, and thus we didn't recommend it. So right now we push a lot of people to Canon, but that's a lot of lost sales. And the Canon R8 is not a sexy camera. It just looks like a 1980s SLR. When you have that around your neck, you look like a tourist. And young people in particular are flocking to attractive cameras. Why wouldn't you like a little bit of nice design? Things like the Fuji X100V or even the Nikon ZF and ZFC are more popular because they look good. All the camera manufacturers should make attractive cameras. They also need to completely revamp the user interface. Hand any modern camera to somebody in their teens or 20s, and they're going to be lost with the user interface, which is literally straight out of the 90s. It is appalling. It is unsearchable, it is confusing, and it is ugly. They need to revamp the user interfaces, preferably by revamping the operating system, building something that's more robust. They also need to greatly simplify it. There's simply too many menu items. Photography does not have to be that complex. Almost everything should be handled by dials instead of digging into the menus. And finally, they need to improve the connectivity. Modern cameras are mostly smartphone accessories, just something a little bit better than the cameras on your smartphone. But it shouldn't be a pain to get the pictures from your camera to your smartphone, and right now it is. Those apps exist. I've tested them all. They're slow and they suck. They're unreliable. They need to improve that. They also need to provide more instantaneous connectivity. I would put SIMs, cellular chips, into cameras and allow them to upload to the cloud. That doesn't have to be expensive. But I also think there's a ton of growth opportunity for camera manufacturers at the high end. People like myself who've been photographers for many years and have reached a certain status where we can spend a few bucks, and we're going to keep at it. We are comfortable with the menus. We know how to get around, but we'd like stuff a little more high end. Faster lenses. That's something Sony keeps missing out on. Give me an 85 f1.2. Give me a 35 f1.2. Hell, make it faster than that. Make it a 50 f1.0 with autofocus. Or give me a 600 f2.8 wildlife lens with a built-in teleconverter. Go crazy, go expensive, go big, or go home. I'd like to see cameras with 100 megapixels. I'm currently shifting a lot of my work over to the 100 megapixel Hasselblad sensors, not just because of the megapixels, but because of the experience. These are beautiful cameras. They are luxury cameras. And there's lots of photographers like me who care about the experience and the feel as well as the image quality. Sony, Canon, Nikon, they don't have any competitors in this segment. Fuji has medium format, but the cameras are ugly and clumsy to use. And finally, workflow. Professional photographers are begging for better ways to manage their photos. And almost all of us today are still using the memory cards to transfer them from a camera to a PC. Of course, that should be fast, it should be wireless, it should be seamless, it should be cellular. We should get instantaneous backups. We should have things like GPS tagging in our photos to make it easier to find photos that were taken at a particular location or to retrace our steps for a particularly good photo that we want to recreate. Camera manufacturers are missing so many opportunities to just give us more frames per second and higher refresh rates, which almost nobody is asking for. Now, our top story, Apple is buying Pixelmator. And if you aren't familiar with Pixelmator, it's a company that makes two products. First, they make Photomator, which is a lot like Adobe Lightroom. It lets you organize and do light editing on your photos, and right now it has a subscription fee, very reasonable, at $30 a year or $120 if you just want to pay once and use it for the rest of your life. They also make an app called Pixelmator Pro. This is more like Photoshop. It includes design features, like you can add text to images, and while Photomator runs on your Mac, your iPhone, your iPad, or even your Vision Pro, Pixelmator Pro runs only on Mac, so it's computer software, and it's $50, so it's significantly cheaper than the monthly subscription you would pay for Photoshop. What is Apple planning by buying these two very direct Adobe competitors? I personally think it's a direct attack on Adobe and Adobe's pretty high profit margins. 2023's Adobe revenue was $19 billion, and that grew by 10%, and their net profit was $5.4 billion. Apple wants that. I mean, Apple makes like 20 times that. They're making close to $400 billion in top line and almost $100 billion in net income. So they're doing fine. But Apple is a competitive company, and if there's somebody in an adjacent space that's making money, they're gonna try to overtake it. And let's face it, this now is the #1 camera in the world. This is how most people are editing and sharing their photos now. And I bet Apple's iCloud, where your pictures can automatically go if you pay a reasonable amount on the iPhone, I bet that's probably the biggest cloud image storage, and it's already really powerful. So by buying this third-party company that makes pretty solid software for all of the Apple platforms, well, I would bet that Apple is planning to lure creators into their infrastructure and lock them in. If you're not already locked in by things like an Apple Watch or Apple CarPlay or the limitations of working outside of iMessage for things like direct messaging, if Apple hasn't already locked you in, they will use these advanced features and iCloud storage to keep creators locked in. This is terrible news for Adobe in the long term. Creators like me can't necessarily get away from Lightroom and Photoshop right away. But young people won't ever have to learn Photoshop or Lightroom. They'll be able to just use the apps that come with their iPhone, that come with their Mac, or maybe there's a small fee to use them. But that will become the new default because Apple defines the default for most of the United States, if not most of the world. In the comments down below, tell me, are you happy that Apple is taking on Adobe because Adobe's kind of evil? Or is it a wash because Apple is also kind of evil? At least Apple doesn't go through your pictures. They give you real privacy in the cloud. And thank you to our sponsor, Squarespace. Start at squarespace.com/Tony to set up a proper website, a professional website with your own domain name, with your own email addresses. This is so much better than social media because you control everything, the colors, the fonts. You can sell stuff on a store, get detailed analytics. These are things professionals like you and me absolutely need. And it's not just photography. It's not just video, though they're excellent at that. It's whatever you can imagine. Personal projects, restaurants, business, your dental office. Everything deserves a Squarespace website. So start at squarespace.com/Tony and try it out completely free. No credit card, no catches. They're not going to lock you in. You just get to try out their beautiful designs and set up your website. And if you decide to continue with it, the coupon code Tony will save you 10%. Thank you, Squarespace. Bye.